Welcome, one and all. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world. It's time for another Light 'em Up live show. It's Wednesday, and I'm excited and honored to welcome a very special guest today. And we'll be talking about a slightly different topic, and we'll be taking a slightly different angle on the cigar industry together with Joshua Habursky, who is the head of government affairs for the Premium Cigar Association. And so without further ado, Mr. Habursky, thank you so much for joining us here at Light 'em Up, and thanks for getting things started with us. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to the discussion. I know, Reinhard, you and I have talked several times leading up to this conversation about kind of the world stage of premium cigar policy and things that are going on in a variety of different countries. Of course, you know, a lot of the stuff in the United States has been very active at both the state and federal levels. And I know we'll go through some of that, but also learning, very interested in having a conversation with all of you that have that global perspective on what's going on in the policy arena in your countries.
Now, what I would like to ask you at the beginning is, since we usually have the manufacturers, the brand owners, media and influencers here on the show, and today when we look at the industry from a slightly different perspective, I actually want to hear about your personal journey with cigars, about the PCA in general, because I still believe that to a lot of people probably the trade show comes to mind first, but there's so much more to that and so much more behind it, and we want to learn about all that. But before that, when you look back to the various positions that you've had and the jobs that you did, when working on supporting other people, defending other people's rights, and fighting for a greater purpose, do you consider that a job that you at some point in your life decide to grow into, or is it truly a calling that you sort of have to carry in you and ultimately it will come to fruition?
I definitely think that it depends on the organization and the issue area where you work in. For me, I have loved cigars going back to, 18 years old. At the time, that was the age of purchase when I was in college. And I had a college professor that had the Winston Churchill Society, and all of us political science students would meet on Fridays for a cigar and talk about politics, current affairs. And that's how I got into, my love of cigars, first and foremost. But secondly, my goal initially and career-wise, I wanted to be a political science professor. I wanted to take after the person who really helped mold me as a person and as an undergraduate student. And, when I moved to DC to go to grad school at Georgetown, I took whatever the first job in government relations was, and it was the American Motorcyclists Association. So lobbying for the rights of motorcyclists, both on highway and off highway, and through a roundabout of different events, and through a decade-long career, I ended up uniting the two passions of political science with cigars, and now serving as our head of government affairs. Is a true blessing and an honor, getting to represent the retail community, the manufacturers, and the consumers before Congress, the White House, the Food and Drug Administration, and the like.
So maybe at the beginning, because we have a global audience and probably not everybody is as familiar with the PCA as an association as our dear friends, brothers and sisters in the United States. Give us a little intro into the PCA on a larger level, and then also how do you see your position in there and the specific areas of expertise that you're working on?
Absolutely. So the Premium Cigar Association, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, we're known for the trade show, to having the Super Bowl of the cigar industry, where, new products, where it's the family reunion, so to speak, of the cigar community. And we're having it in Las Vegas this year, July 9th through the 13th. Incredibly excited for that. But PCA is also, a key member benefit is advocacy and defending the rights of consumers, manufacturers, and retailers. Retailers is our focus. We principally represent the 3,000 plus cigar lounges, retail stores, cigar bars in the United States, and advocate for policy, at the local, state, and federal level, that helps the industry grow, thrive, and remain protected. So, I think that that's a key aspect of the association, but we also provide educational opportunities, thought leadership, and try to build best practices for the retail community. We've also, through the pandemic, have gotten creative, and gone directly out, meeting with the retailers, have done, produced content that we think benefits the cigar community at large.
Now, you have quite an interesting curriculum before you ended up with PCA. And just to pull a couple of these, like you worked for the American Motorcycles Association, the Diabetes Association, you lobbied for community banks in the financial services sector. When representing such a diverse field, where is the common red thread in all that?
Yeah, I think, I've developed as a generalist in my career, being able to advocate for a variety of different issue areas, learn the voice and the mission of the organization, and being able to effectively communicate. I really started out in the grassroots advocacy space, and that's been something consistently in all four roles that has been my strength, is getting people excited, understanding complex policy in a way that is digestible. The average person, all right, this is what's wrong with this policy. This is what's right with this policy. This is how it affects me. So being able to distill that down, get people excited to write to their elected officials, to engage, to call, to meet with their members of Congress up down the street here at the Capitol, things like that. I think that throughout my career, the common thread has been really diving in with membership, and effectively communicating with folks. But I can say, I've really hit my stride in my career with the Premium Cigar Association, because it is a passion. It's one that I want to protect my ability to enjoy a premium cigar just like the next person. And it has been so meaningful for me in developing the relationships, the friendships, that sense of community throughout my career, even before I was representing at PCA, that I cannot think of a better place to work and really thrive.
I believe, well, at least in my humble opinion and from my perspective, the area that you're working in sometimes has a little bit of an unknown connotation, or a little bit of a mystique around it, where people feel like even the word lobbying is something strange to take into your mouth. Why do you think that that's the case, and how could we all try to improve on that, or make sure that the enormously important tasks that you have put on your shoulders is actually acknowledged and treasured in the right way by the people out there?
Yeah, it's funny, because lobbying is almost like that scarlet L. I think Hollywood in the movies and the TV shows continually portray lobbying in a negative light, that it's all corrupt, it's all bad. And that's not the case. I mean, there's different types of lobbyists. I'm a paid lobbyist that represents the industry. I've studied to do that. But there's also citizen lobbyists. And those are all of you that communicate with any elected official, provide their viewpoints. I like to look at it as this, I need to tee up legislation. I need to have those initial conversations with elected officials and regulators to set the groundwork and the foundation. But if we're going to be successful on any policy, we have to have retailers, manufacturers, and consumers telling their personal story. Why is this important? We need to ensure that the elected officials and regulators understand the economic impact, the health impact, and also the emotional impact. These are real people's jobs, livelihoods, and businesses that are at stake. And, telling that story, I think people understand that a lot better, is that, lobbying is communication, whether it's done by somebody that's a paid, staff person or by a volunteer individual. Those are both, lobbying in a sense. So I think that, the portrayal of the steak dinners and the fancy cars and the jets, all that stuff, that is furthest from the truth. I do like to say that our lobbying does happen in the smoke-filled rooms. That is kind of the joke there. But most of it is communication policy, educating lawmakers about the issues. I mean, just think about the variety of different topics that elected officials and regulators are faced on any given day. We're not only competing with other interest and opposition groups, but we're competing for the time and attention of these lawmakers that are considering environmental policy, economic policy, defense policy, the like. So we need to be out there forward facing. During my 2 years, and actually this week I'm celebrating my 2-year anniversary at the Premium Cigar Association. We've been very aggressive. We've come in, we've challenged the opposition. We're not allowing conflation of data with, non-premium cigars in those policy conversations. So that's something that will continue. We have a great team, Glenn Loop, who we just brought over from Cigar Rights of America. I couldn't be more proud of the achievements that we've been able to do, given the pandemic, given the constraints in the past 2 years.
We had the tremendous pleasure and honor of welcoming Glenn to the show as well. He was with us probably a half year ago or so. And you definitely assembled an amazing team there. How about some of the other relationships with not only people of the industry, but also like other associations and advocacy groups? What's the current status of how you all come together, interact with each other, and work together towards the greater purpose?
Yeah, at PCA, we really have an open door policy. We'll communicate, we'll work on things where we can find common ground and agree on. There are going to be differences and distinctions, and we welcome those. Those are not something that we shy away from. Not everyone's going to be aligned, even within an organization itself. There are things where, we have to sit back, evaluate the position. And one of the things that I've learned in my time is assessing the situation, looking at the pros and cons before, making a statement. I would love to be first every single time that, all the media outlets are citing the Premium Cigar Association as the authority on what's going on in Washington, what's going on in the state capitals. And many times we do put that out there. But there are times where we have to be collective, look back and say, all right, maybe it isn't in the best interest of everyone if we make a statement on something. So, we have been doing a lot of evaluations, working with coordinate groups. I have a steady communication every week with Cigar Rights of America. A lot of their board members and the key manufacturers, as well as the key retailers, have taught me a lot and have allowed me to, really hit the ground running. In this 2 years, to go from the director of federal affairs, which I was hired to do, to be the head of government affairs and represent, PCA at all levels of government in some sense, has been a true honor. But I would not feel comfortable doing that if I didn't have the instruction and the advice from manufacturers and our retailers. John Anderson, who is our chairman and president, he's a dear friend, and I will be forever grateful for him and what his level of access and openness of teaching me of that. Another person, Luciano from Ace Prime, going to Nicaragua with him this past January, learning, getting down in the weeds of things to know the whole process, to know the whole supply chain, or at least get that surface level understanding. That has been very rewarding for me, and something that I will, bring with me for many years to come.
You keep saying over and over again that first and foremost, you consider yourself a consumer and not primarily just as a professional in the advocacy and in the cigar space. Do you believe that that is the quintessentially important foundation of everything you do in advocacy? And my second question to that is also, how has your perspective on the cigar industry changed, and how has your consumer behavior changed now that you entered the industry or the business with that particular angle?
Those are great questions. I think definitely as a consumer, it has helped shape who I am as an advocate. I think that there's a passion. I hate losing because I have a vested interest in it. So, we try our best. We are going to give 150% every single time. As a consumer, it's funny because we cite the data about consumption and that the fact that, the average person has, 2 cigars a month on average based off of NIH FDA data. And I always kind of chuckle when I cite that, because I know that I am an outlier to that statistic, because I enjoy 3 or 4 cigars a day. My morning routine consists of an espresso and a cigar. 8 o'clock in the morning, my taste profile has shifted. I am almost exclusively smoking Nicaraguan cigars, Maduro and Oscuro, very dark, earthy. So, that has been something that has changed. But I think that being a consumer first and then transitioning over into the role that I have, it really was the perfect sequence. I do remember when I first started, my first 3 months, I remember being on conference calls with, John Anderson, who owns Curtis Draper's here in Washington. He's the owner of a great shop that I would go to. So kind of a legend in the area. And then also on conference calls with the major manufacturers. And, I'm a cigar nerd. I was reading Cigar Aficionado at 18, smoking the cigars, and then being in that environment, being in the boardroom with these folks, there was a little bit of starstruck mentality, and I had to quickly get over it. Now we're to the point where I love their cigars, I respect their story, but I'm a professional here doing a job, and I'm not afraid or bashful about challenging folks, even though I have that respect, because at the end of the day, I have to make sure that my personal feelings towards the product and the enjoyment of it don't interfere with my expertise as a policy person. So, that transition, it did take some time where it's like, oh my gosh, calling up my mom and dad, hey, I'm on the phone with, Alan Rubin or Rocky Patel. Isn't this so cool? And, but those guys in particular have been incredibly, it's been incredible to meet and work with them and befriend them. They are other folks that have helped shape me into an advocate for the industry.
We had a great question over on Facebook from Alberto. He's joining us from Mexico, as well as a couple of other people. And thank you all for your questions. As always, an absolute pleasure. But Alberto was asking, what do you recommend to Mexican businessmen, taking that as a prime example, to promote new laws in favor of tobacco and premium cigars? Or probably to invert the question, what could be another recommendation to fight against non-favorable law situations that will prohibit the premium cigar enjoyment?
Yeah, I think you have to be strategic with any policy, whether it's pro or con, going for something or going against anything. You have to have credible data from outside sources. You have to have, the talking points nailed down to, exactly what you're hoping to achieve. Don't leave any wiggle room, because you may assert something and are for a certain policy, and if there's any miscommunication, it can be ended up being the final piece to it could be problematic for the industry. So you have to have very tight language that your goals and our objectives are tied to. But data, research, those are key things that you have to have in your toolbox. You have to have that passion, as I mentioned before. But building a record and having patience is also important. For an example, when it was last January, the Food and Drug Administration in a guidance document cited that premium cigars are the lowest enforcement priority in terms of youth access to tobacco. I would say right now in the United States, the number one focus of tobacco control and tobacco policy is youth access. So once we had that one sentence in that guidance document, you have seen that everywhere for the past 2 years in all of the communications that we've put out, all of the assertions that we made that premium cigars are different, that we need to be regulated in a different way. And so the little things, those little achievements can have long-term results, but you have to have the patience in order. The policy process can be extremely quick, but it can also be extremely slow. And you have to know the tools, tactics, and techniques and when to deploy each of those things. And sometimes you have to think out of the box. You mentioned partners, working well in coalitions, getting information. PCA, we're a retail organization. So the National Retail Federation that represents, everything from the big box retailers to small Main Street businesses, we can learn from things, and we might want to sign on a coalition letter for a very specific topic. One of the things that I'm very proud of in our government affairs work is that, we are very steadfast in our commitment to premium cigars and actual tobacco policy, but we're also looking at everything from payment processing to labor to small business issues. When COVID was in its peak here, when the shutdowns were taking place last year, we were seeking funding for our members to get better ventilation systems. And really, that was a long-term approach of working with government to protect that. Again, tobacco wasn't necessarily the lead subject in that, but we were doing a service to our members so that they could continue to grow and thrive and sustain in a very challenging time.
Now, since you mentioned a couple of main objectives and some of the most pressing and most important focus points of your work, one I would assume is the definition of what is a premium cigar and how is it different from other combustible tobacco products. What are some of those key focus points that you're actually working on right now?
Yeah, so, I think you highlighted one with the definition. I mean, we just presented to the National Academies of Sciences, which is a organization that was tasked by the National Institute of Health and the Food and Drug Administration to study the effects, the health effects and usage of premium cigars. So we presented to over a dozen medical professionals about that, alongside our partners of Cigar Rights of America. Recently there was a press statement by the Biden administration of their intention, and the Center for Tobacco Products at the Food and Drug Administration, a press release about their intention to ban flavored cigars. So we're looking into that. And I provided some commentary on that for a Facebook Live that we did for PCA. Really, that was a press statement. The policy hasn't come yet. We don't know exactly what that will encapsulate. We will develop a position once we see the actual policy language, the regulatory language to that. But one of the things that I talked to our advocacy committee and our board of directors yesterday, we are not in the position of supporting prohibition on legal products to legal adults. Premium cigars is our North Star. That's our focus. But we also represent pipe tobacco, and that is an important business, component to our brick and mortar retailers, and one that we've defended, whether it's from different tax rates. We've seen a lot of activity at the state and local level. Local governments want to take over taxation and the ability to regulate tobacco. So everything from Florida, was considering banning the usage of tobacco products in public parks and beaches. And I love, anytime I go to Miami, that's the best, walking that waterfront area, smoking a cigar, maybe one that was just hand rolled down the street. And so that was a success where we were able to defeat that ban. Marvin Holzhauser, one of our board members, testified in Tallahassee against that bill. So I would say tax increases, being cautious not to get lumped into regulations and legislation that involves cigarettes and e-cigarettes. In the United States, there is, like I mentioned, youth access is probably the top issue that tobacco control is facing, but a close second is vaping and e-cigarettes. There's been a ton of legislation at both the federal and state levels that we've had to monitor in terms of, the review of these products, the regulations on them. So we deal with a wide variety of issues. Fortunately, our team has worked incredibly hard. We've defeated, I think we're almost at a dozen. We will be at a dozen tax increases that we've defeated by the end of this legislative session. Easily.
You mentioned that one of the critical components of your work is communication. Now, you have a very active communication stream with governmental officials. You speak a lot to other representatives of the industry. Yet the one aspect of the entire equation that's probably difficult to reach, to challenge, and to get up and moving is probably the end consumer and the people who ultimately matter. Why do you think is it challenging and sometimes probably even frustrating to really get the people behind these good causes? Why is it so challenging to engage the cigar enthusiasts in that important fight to protect their rights? Because ultimately it's all about them. It's about us as consumers.
Yeah, I think that we've done a better job recently in getting more consumers involved. I mentioned before, our focus is retailers. Cigar Rights of America does a really good job here with the consumers. We've partnered with them on different projects. We launched 2 years ago, cigaraction.org, which is a consumer-facing site. It's a web tool where, your average citizen can write to their U.S. senators, their members of Congress. Takes 30 seconds. We pre-write a lot of the letters and the petitions, and we've launched over 50 different petitions and campaigns this year where average citizens and consumers can take part in that process. I think it's challenging because in any advocacy issue area, and cigars, premium cigars being one of them, you have to put it and take these complex, nebulous policies and explain it to folks to, that they can digest what it actually means. And most of the time when people are going to get activated and involved is if it directly affects them. If your ability to enjoy the cigars that you're smoking right now is affected by a policy outcome, you are going to get involved. If your shop is shut down, you're going to get involved. Some of our most successful campaigns have been when we've had the most imminent threats that we've faced. I'll give you an example. In Michigan, they originally interpreted the mask mandate to shut down all cigar lounges, no indoor smoking in the entire state of Michigan. We convened and worked with the Michigan State Association in partnership to get the Secretary of Health and Human Services for the state together. And we were able to work with them to showcase that in cigar lounges, there's better ventilation than any other retail business, restaurant, that the air circulation is and the air quality is significantly better. So they ended up amending their order that allowed for cigar lounges that had a ventilation system that meet a certain criteria. They were able to reopen, and we were able to achieve that within 2 weeks' time. We also had nearly 4,000 consumers write within a week about that issue and that policy concern. So I think having an imminent threat that directly impacts a consumer, they're going to reach out, they're going to get involved, but we need to do a good job in taking that policy and explaining it to folks. You know, a lot of people saw in the United States and worldwide about the menthol ban and the flavor ban. And I think the news headlines were a little bit misleading. And I mentioned this on my Facebook Live. You know, we are many months, if not years away from an actual policy position on that being formulated. That's not even accounting litigation and the court system. That's an important part of the policy process. We're involved in the front end lobbying for favorable policies, but you know, there are in the courts, there's the executive and the legislative. You know, we're working on all three frontiers. We were successful in 2 lawsuits in the United States against the Food and Drug Administration. There's one that is also still active. So we're using, and I mentioned the different tools. We are utilizing the toolbox in all of the different areas. I think on the legislative front and the executive front, the consumer is a key component to the success or failure of the industry.
I also brought up this question because, as you mentioned before, grassroots is truly where you come from and what has always been most fascinating to you. So where do you see the key to success in building successful grassroots movements, and what could be some sort of best practices, or besides everything that you just mentioned, how do you particularly think people could and should get excited and involved?
Yeah, you know, I think that we need to work through the industry itself. We always talk about the premium cigar industry being a family. We need to work with our relatives. You know, anytime you have a new idea, chances are you bounce that new idea off your parents, your grandparents, your brothers and sisters. So I think that that's important too. If we're going to recruit consumers and get a consumer army geared up to battle bad policy or advocate for positive policy, we need to work with the retail owners, the employees, the people that are affected directly, the people that receive a paycheck from this industry, and we need to showcase their stories. So the 300,000 plus jobs in Nicaragua, the DR, Honduras, and other countries, the administrations need to know the ramifications and the domino effect of those policy decisions. So getting those voices involved in the process, and a lot of it will be our team and some of the other associations out there providing communication vehicles like cigaraction.org for where those voices can be heard. So you know, I think working through the family, recruiting people internally. I think manufacturers, their sales teams that are on the road, that's another key component to growing people and getting people involved. We need to package our information, and this information warehouse that is PCA, 3 blocks from the United States Capitol, we need to package that information to the different stakeholders within the industry so that they can spread the information like wildfire. We can't operate in a vacuum where, there's 4 or 5 of us that have all this knowledge of what's going on, and it stays internal. So we're building those vehicles. We're trying to improve, with the trade show, which we referenced a little earlier in the conversation. We're going to have new advocacy training breakout sessions. We're going to have a breakout session on international policy. That's an area that is really intriguing to me. I think that looking at it from a comparative policy perspective is important. The bans on all tobacco purchasing that was discussed in New Zealand, the tax increases that are being considered in the EU, there's a domino effect, a ripple effect of what's going on worldwide and the effect in the United States and vice versa. So the lessons learned and the successes and failures that we've had as an association for a number of years. I've been here 2 years as a direct employee and another year as a consultant for the organization, but going back decades, transferring that knowledge to other folks, comparing notes. I think the work that you've done, Reinhard, with the Cigar Rights of the World, that's exciting. Getting more people involved from a global perspective will be important as we tackle these challenging issues and some very tough battles that we know that will be on the horizon.
And speaking of those global triple down effects and how we could support each other, but also because we spoke about the definition of a premium cigar, do you think that at some point further down the timeline, would it be realistic or even useful to look at a sort of a global definition of what a premium cigar could be? Do you see any potential for that, or is it just going to be an unrealistic, wishful thinking simply because of how differently governments think all around the globe and how things are being operated?
I mean, it's tough. We spent many months and many conversations about the definition of a premium cigar. We still have conversations about it, but I think in the United States, we are the closest that we've ever been to having a uniform definition of a premium cigar, one that has been recognized in the courts, one that has been recognized by the Food and Drug Administration, one that is recognized by Cigar Rights of America and the Premium Cigar Association. Everybody is unified under that, and that has been one of the reasons why we've been able to create and fortify that distinctiveness argument, that this is what a premium cigar is, this is why it's different, this is the usage pattern, this is the user profiles. So, I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, it was a challenge. It was a battle. There still isn't 100% universal agreement in the United States of what constitutes a premium cigar. But I think that we are the closest we've ever been. And we have, some battles that are, coming up in the next few months that definition will be further memorialized and further codified, so to speak, so that we can utilize it. But we have to be careful as an industry. And I think my only word of caution after the experience of the 2 years is we can't be fractionalized, even if we disagree on certain policy enactments, even the definition itself. We can't work against one another. We have to find common ground. We have to work together when we can, and not completely ignore differences, but not be adversarial when it comes to the work that we do. If we are fractionalized and fragmented, we will lose to the forces of the anti groups.
And as you mentioned before, you love losing and you're a very competitive person. As a matter of fact, I know you're into sports as well. And you also have a side hustle in the hospitality industry. So we sort of share the passion and the background in that field of expertise and passion. Um, where do you think that competitiveness comes from? Is it something that you grew up with, or that was sort of gifted to you by your parents? Was it the part of that sports mentality that got into the overall picture?
Yeah, it's funny. My sister and I were very competitive growing up. We're only 4 years apart, and I think that that's where it comes from. My parents really don't understand where I came from because they were not into politics at all. Actually, they hate politics. So I'm a bit of an anomaly in that sense. They've taught me a lot of lessons in other areas, and it's a joy. I think that I've tried to manage that competitiveness and really enjoy the moment of what we're doing now. Get creative, get entrepreneurial. You mentioned the hospitality. I have ownership in 2 taco and tequila bars here in the DC area, and that has been helpful in adapting to my day job as well, in understanding consumer patterns, understanding challenges of small businesses. During the pandemic, a lot of the restrictions and government policies that we had to follow as a restaurant, our members were following those at PCA. So there was that kind of similarities, and having experienced it firsthand, I was able to adapt some of those things. But yeah, it's the sports side. I've gotten into the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting. I actually was in Jacksonville recently for the most recent fight, and also a big Formula One fan, and enjoy the Grand Tour. I think that's my show of choice right now on Amazon Prime.
And what always strikes me is that the cigar industry and hospitality seem to share so many values and share so much common ground. Where when I always say that a cigar is a glimpse into the heart and soul of the people behind it, and all the people that came before us and will come after us, and also hospitality is such a caring act of generosity and the sincere wish to treat other people well, to share amazing moments. So I believe we're very much aligned in all that. How does it inspire you to work in those different industries, and do you also see those parallels?
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing people, conversing, having meaningful conversation, bantering and debating the issues of the day. And I think that the cigar lounge is a quintessential arena where people can have these free thinking, open conversations and talk about issues that they wouldn't talk about in any other arena. There's this relaxing component of having a cigar and being able to talk about tough issues. And I think that from the hospitality perspective, I enjoy seeing people when they're in their comfort zones, when they're happy. And that has been the beauty of this job. Last year, I did 75 retail visits or lounge visits. My goal this year is 100. I want to meet people. I want to meet the consumers. I want to meet the retailers and sales reps and manufacturers and hear from them, what are the pain points? What are the issues that you're facing? And how can we help? How can we be a service? My colleague Ryan, who does research for the Premium Cigar Association, we recently did a trip to New England where I did an interview with Dave Garofalo and the Cigar Authority, and visited about 8 different shops in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And going from place to place and seeing the unique cigar culture, there's commonalities among them, but the uniqueness also of each individual shop, the camaraderie, the discussions. I don't like to smoke alone. And that's really something that I have enjoyed, throughout my time at PCA, is having those conversations over a cigar.
Over to our dear friend Ian, who has a question for us.
Joshua, thank you very much. And I'm very pleased that you're working with Cigar Arts of America and other people. I had a question about getting through to politicians, because obviously everyone is, well, a lot of politicians know about the cigarette industry and what they've done in the past. And I think that's given tobacco a bad name. And the question really is sort of, how do you convince politicians that cigars are different and that they shouldn't lump us in with tobacco? Because there must be many people who just are not open to that conversation, and they don't understand that it's a completely different product. It doesn't appeal to children, and as you say, it supports hundreds of thousands of people in generally poor countries, and it's their livelihood. How have you had success in getting through to certain politicians and them changing their minds about cigars?
Yeah, absolutely. My first year, we did 350 meetings with members of Congress. And we also, in those engagements and conversations, we showcased the information about, the data and research as you referenced, but we also told those personal stories. We connected folks with retailers and manufacturers to talk about the nuances of premium cigars and talk about how we are not these other products. I think there is a stigma about tobacco products in general, and it is an uphill battle. It isn't, we had some very tough conversations with elected officials. Premium cigars are not a Republican or a Democratic issue. We are the party of cigars. And I think education and constant outreach are important to maintain the level of success that we've had. We're actually getting back to small events here in Washington. Later this evening, we're having a reception here for staff members to educate them about premium cigars and the nuances. We had a public engagement series where, if you worked on Capitol Hill and you were a US Senator or a member of Congress, or if you were a general consumer in the area, you could come to our office and learn about premium cigars and an aspect of it. We showed the film Hand Rolled. We presented case studies. I know a very good friend of, a mutual friend of many of us, we talked about around the world in 80 cigars, and did presentations that weren't really policy oriented. It was more about the story of premium cigars. And then we talked about why it's important to defend premium cigars and create this model where we're not lumped into all of the other tobacco products. So taking it behind, there's a bit of a mystique to premium cigars in general, and not everybody is aware. I mean, many of the staffers that I met with never smoked a premium cigar, never went to a lounge or a retail shop. They think that a premium cigar is a 99-cent flavored cherry product that's in a convenience store. And talking about those distinctions and highlighting the story of the folks and the people that make up the beauty of the premium cigar industry is important to getting through with lawmakers.
And do some of those lawmakers come back to you and have an epiphany moment, and they suddenly get it? They realize that perhaps what they thought about cigars in the past was wrong, and that maybe they shouldn't be lumping them in with other tobaccos. Absolutely.
And especially, I'm a firm believer in inputs and outputs. Whatever you put into something is directly correlated to what's going to come out of it. So some lawmakers that have an initial meeting where they hear our talking points, they get our glossy one-pager, and then they decide, well, this is interesting. They bring up a lot of important points. Maybe I should go and visit a cigar lounge that's in my district and see what it's all about. And then they go and they see that there aren't kids walking around a cigar lounge. There are people that are having sophisticated, refined conversations, diplomatic conversations amongst one another, and that they're infrequently using them. Or there are people in there purchasing a premium cigar to celebrate a birth of a child, a wedding, a graduation from college, things like that. I think that the lawmakers and staff that do the extra homework, so to speak, really understand. We have some very, very active champions in Congress and even amongst the regulators. We invited to our trade show several members of Congress and staff, as we do every year. And this year, I actually had two people that in the past have come to our trade show reach back out and say, hey, are you inviting us again? We would love to come back and see everyone. It is that family reunion atmosphere, and we're growing that family. And it's always great to have some family members that are influential people that make policy decisions.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ian. And let's bring in Scott Wines. Thanks for being with us, Scott. Always a pleasure.
It was a pleasure, Reinhard. Joshua has been good to listen to. I've not met you before, but actually I'm a member of the PCA internationally, so through my business. So I do come to the PCA or the IPCPR, or whatever it's called, every year. So I obviously take a very active interest in what's going on in the States, because it always starts there and spreads out. But with a lot of legislation, we seem to be hitting harder in Europe and in the UK than you guys, and maybe you guys defend it better. My background is actually 25 years in cigarettes before I grew up and moved into the cigar business. So now, so I've seen both sides of legislation. And in my days working for the corporate cigarette companies, we spent a lot of time doing corporate lobbying as a country manager with health officials, fiscal officials, customs officials, and so on, because they've all got, you need three skills to balance them all. The health guy wants this, the fiscal guy wants this, and all the rest of it. So it's quite a challenge. So one of the things we've tried to do, Joshua, is separate out cigars from cigarettes completely. We have an industry group in the UK at import level, because we don't really have manufacturers based here as such. And we've been trying very hard over the last few years to define a cigar, a handmade cigar. And because of and really that was driven by health warning labeling, because we have what they call plain packaging for cigarettes, and our government in their wisdom decided to go down the same route on handmade cigars. So we had to come up with something very, very quickly. So I take on board the point you made earlier. It's when you're under the most pressure, you come up with the best ideas and you come up with the best lobbying process. And we actually mocked up a box of Churchill cigars, very, very simple, made it look like what they were defining on their legislation, and put it against a packet of what Marlboro was going to look like. And the health warning on the box of the Churchill cigars was twice the size a packet of cigarettes. So we put the argument forward very simply, that you're asking us to, you know, we're not 0.3% of the tobacco smoking community, but you want us to produce something draconian like this. And they actually came back and said, well, that's not what we meant. So we were able to get the legislation changed, which is a very unique thing to happen, because normally once it's written, it's almost impossible to change. So the expression we got from one of the health officials was, get the dogs off, and okay, we get it, you've got your message across. But the key thing is to define the difference between a cigarette and a cigar. And it's very hard to do. We managed to get into the parliamentary review, which is a document that goes to every House of Lords, every member of Parliament, to explain it's an artisanal product. It's a family businesses. We got the ambassadors in the Central America to get involved in this process as well, to help us with the lobby process. So I'm not saying we're there yet. We're miles and hundreds of years away from it. But it's a case of trying to pick a fight that you can win, and win it well. So if you win it well, they listen to you the next time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So sorry, I'm not asking you questions. I'm really intrigued to hear how you're approaching it. But I just thought I'd give you something back from how we're approaching it.
That's very helpful. I think that you raise several important points. One of which is, there's a lot of lessons learned from the global perspective, as we mentioned, and Reinhard and I have been talking about, and I don't want to, spill the beans on something that's going to be forthcoming, but, we hope to have a global conversation on, tobacco policy, but more focused on premium cigars from the international perspective. I think the trade agreements, import and export, that's going to be a huge factor in the years to come. And, analyzing it from the global perspective is going to be important. The plain packaging, that is extremely, terrible to see, because, part of the beauty of premium cigars is the artisanal boxes and the craftsmanship that you see there. So that's been something that, we've worked very hard to protect, and something that we'll continue to work hard to protect. But I'm glad to see that, there are folks fighting the fight in the UK, and to the extent that we can. And I know that resource scarcity wise, it's tough, especially, coming out of the pandemic, but we want to be a global resource for premium cigars, and where we can provide tools and collaborations. I mentioned to Reinhard, our grassroots capabilities extend to Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, and we're exploring different programs in the EU. They're developing technology from a grassroots perspective. It's always been that the United States in the grassroots technology infrastructure, because we have less regulation as it comes to email policy and privacy policy. We've always been a little bit of ahead of the curve when it comes to that ability for average citizens to communicate. But we're exploring ways where, we can do that and offer those tools to groups like Cigar Rights of the World, Cigar Rights of Europe, so that, maybe we're already paying for this service as an association for the United States. Maybe you folks can utilize that tool that we already use elsewhere. We don't want to see premium cigars restricted in any country. My focus might be in the United States, but when I go abroad, I mentioned I'm a consumer first. I'm a cigar tourist. Anywhere I go, it's like, where is the lounge that I can go to? And I a year ago went to Prague just before the pandemic, and that was my list. Where can I go and smoke a cigar, and what are the rules there? So that global perspective fascinates me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's through lobbying that we managed to keep sampling lounges, and we'll call them sampling lounges because that's technically what they are. But through extensive lobbying, we managed to do that. I was looking at Ian's comment about air control. The industry spent thousands and millions of pounds, honestly, trying to convince governments of air control, and we didn't need to close off or to have separate smoking areas. And what happened was we have a bizarre situation in our country where the government actually pay for the biggest anti-tobacco lobbyist group.
Yeah.
And we lost that argument, whereas we should have won it. But when you've got a government paying for your own lobby group against the tobacco industry, you've got no chance. So, but we managed to get sampling lounges. But Joshua, thank you very much. It's been very interesting to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, many thanks for your insightful comments. Always great to hear your perspective. And let's bring in our dear friend, the professor. Jose, over to you.
First of all, I would like to say hello to everybody. I was planning to see this from the beginning, but as you can see, the camera went off and on, off and on. I got 3 calls from 3 people, clients. We're doing this, we're doing that. And I heard its and bits. So if I'm going to repeat something that Joshua's already answered, first of all, Joshua, great to see you.
See you.
Listen, as most people know, I've been in the industry for a very long time. When it was RTDA, I was on the advisory committee. And because I traveled 37, 38 weeks out of the year, I could not commit in the last years to some of the to the duties they wanted me to do. So I just couldn't do it. One of the things that I see, you could be the best lobbyist in the world. But what I see that our biggest problem is basically 2 things. We have a whole bunch of retailers that don't give a damn. They think everything is going to be totally smooth. And then I feel that the consumer is not putting in their part. Every time that we would go, that a state was going to go from a 20 to 30 tax or 40 tax, and all the retailers that we got involved doing it, they would put that sheet there where you would write to your congressman, to your senator, if it was a state thing. And I can guarantee you only a certain percentage of consumers would do it. If you would have a state with 100 stores, you will probably see 8 or 10 store owners at the front of that, and all the other work is just left behind to a certain group. The same thing with the CRA. Every time I would do a seminar that I've done, well, before I came back to Europe, about 1,800, probably 1,500 of them in the States, the first thing I would say, how many people are members of the CRA? There were places where I had 40 people who paid their ticket, and everybody was, well, I was thinking about it, bada bing, bada bang. I did an event with Donna Brown one time. Pete Johnson made a special cigar for her, and she donated $5,000 for the event I was there. And everybody, out of the $5,000, she was going to pay for the membership of people. And people didn't even want to sign up. But then you have the NRA that has millions of people. Remember when we had to do the petition, it took the vape people 24 hours to get 100,000 signatures. We hardly beat them in a month. So really, where's the connection? Where's the problem? Is it the connection? Is it the message? Or what really is, or just that people don't give a damn? Because you can't tell me that guns and vape are more enjoyable than cigars. That's my first question, Joshua.
Yeah, I think you come up with some good points there. And I must say, before I respond to the question, I'm a big fan of your show. I enjoy watching the Meet the Professor, every week. That the information that you share on that program. I think with the NRA example, and we get this comparison a lot, it's tough because that, with guns, that is a Second Amendment in the Constitution. I would love to be able to cite a constitutional amendment in the arguments that we make. So I think that there's that side of things where that is a huge mobilization tool for folks. There is, and you're spot on, there's an appetite and an enthusiasm in those areas that we don't see within the consumer base. And I mentioned, before that I think when it directly affects people and their product is on the chopping block or their lounge is on the chopping block, there's a little bit more of an incentive and more of a level of participation. But, I look at it as positives and negatives. This year, we, due to COVID, had staff reductions, had consultant reductions, and we were so successful in defeating a lot of the tax increases. I mentioned we've already defeated 10 of them at the state level. It was retailers and consumers stepping up in those areas where we couldn't be in the state capitals fighting. We provide the logistics and the resources behind the scenes, but if those retailers weren't working and devoting hours upon hours, we have shining examples of people that really have stepped up. And I think you're right to assert that we need more of that. But states like Virginia, Maryland, New York, tough states where legislatures are not necessarily favorable to tobacco products, we've had some significant wins. And that's due to the leaderships of the state association working with the national association to come up with compelling arguments, to provide reasoned and sound advice. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to grow. PCA isn't necessarily the consumer arm, but I mentioned before, cigaraction.org. We've been building that up. We've gained 15,000 people over a short period of time. So I'm hopeful that we can continue to grow those ranks, work with the partners that are consumer focused, and build that army more so that it's consistent. But I think that you're right in some sense that we need some people to step up. And it's not just financially by striking a check. It is participation, it's devoting time, it's improvement, it's constructive feedback too. I think a lot of people shy away from criticism. We need criticism. If you don't like something and we're not offering it in PCA and our government affairs team, reach out to us. And, we do get criticism and we respond to it and we act upon the requests of our membership. So I would tell folks that we have an open line of communication for improvement.
And the other aspect that I was going to touch is that I think in a way all the companies have to be more involved. And I'll tell you why. When I would be traveling, whether it's my years with La Aurora, with Hoya, the last 3 years with Ernesto, and somebody would tell me, so-and-so, they used to work in so-and-so place, they're opening a shop. The first two things before I even sold the product was you have to become a member. We started when it was RTDA, then was IPCPR, and now it's PCA. You have to become a member of the PCA because of this, and that. And second, you have to become an active member and promoter of Cigar Rights of America. And the third thing, please pay your bills. That's very important to continue in business. But the thing is, without mentioning names, everybody who know me, I don't mention company names, cigar brands, or anything like that. But I think it's an obligation, not only of the owners or the CEOs of the companies, but also of the supervisors, of the vendors, when they go in there to talk about the importance to go to the show. You might not like a lot of things that I've told this publicly. There's a lot of things you might not like of the PCA, which I might agree with you. But if you put it into a balance, it's always going to become probably 85, 90% good, maybe 10 because of lack of money or things that didn't work out. Because if we lose the PCA, and I've told this, you can be sure that the damage is going to be bigger because who's going to be out there to defend you? So I think this is something that's part of a, I would just say it in English. Remember, I'm a COVID survivor, but remember, I survived because I smoke cigars. You have to create conciencia to people about what it is. Criticize all you want, but to be honest, this is like the Titanic is sinking and you're able to get the last lifesaver. I've said it for years. PCA and CRA, in my personal opinion, is the last line of defense. And we have to support it. We have to go to the show. I remember it was a couple of years ago that some companies that are not going to the show now, their Facebook pages will, oh, look at this. The place is empty. Even Padron is empty. What kind of show is this? Those people, I told it to can't remember, to a couple of board members, those people should have been taken right out of the organization and not be allowed there. Because if you're a member of the organization and you're the first one to go out on social media and criticize you, we don't want you at the show. I think some things, sometimes I think IPCR before was a little bit lenient on something. Sometimes you got to start making a point, or it's what you always see in the movies, or you're with us or against us. There is no middle. So that's my 2 cents, Joshua.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that, we've seen a lot of manufacturers, and many of which are the CRA board members, step up as it relates to the show, the show exclusive products, the different deals that are offered, encouraging people to come. When we did our town hall last October, and Carlito and George and Rocky and the like, really empowered people to take an active participation, that, millions of dollars have been spent on the defense of the industry, and millions of dollars will continue to be needed to be spent in the defense of the industry. And we need people to actively participate with their time, talent, and treasure. I think that, this year's show is going to be very exciting. There's a lot of new things that are in play. There's also, the product hub. There's other ways to get involved in the PCA beyond the trade show, advocacy being one of them that I will shamelessly plug to the ends of the earth. But, I think that you're right. We need active participation for folks. And, the board ballots are open right now. We're going to have, new folks join the board of directors of the PCA. So I encourage people to vote for the different candidates that are out there, to be involved and active in the association from a decision-making standpoint. And at the show, to talk about the different policy things. Glenn Loop and I will be providing a legislative and regulatory update, and then entering a panel discussion with some of the top leaders in the industry. And we're hopeful to get a sense of direction where everyone stands on the different issues that are facing us as we move forward, and a blueprint of how we can move forward, creating together that strategic plan where we can be successful and continue to fight back against some of this problematic legislation and regulation.
Thanks, Joshua. Great to see you. I'll see you, God willing, at the show.
Sounds good. I hope to enjoy a cigar and a cocktail with you.
Only one cocktail?
Yeah, I better say that now. One. I'm on the job, so one.
Jose, many thanks for tuning in as always.
I'm sorry I missed part of it, but it was
not at all. I believe it was clearly obvious just how important this topic is in general, and how important the work is that you, Mr. Habursky, have been putting in for the last 2 years now, and that you will continue to put in on a daily basis in order to fight for our community, for the beloved cigar world, and for our right and the passion to enjoy premium cigars. So I would also like to personally thank you for that service and for everything that you bring to the table. And it's because of people like yourself, people like Scott Vines, and all the icons of the industry that we get to continue doing what we all love best, and that is come together, share a good cigar, and share a great conversation.
Thank you. I look forward to enjoying a cigar with you. I promised you I have a cigar for you. One of the stories from Nicaragua I mentioned before is I worked with Luciano and the folks at Ace Prime and Pichardo to develop, instead of a business card, I didn't want to give people a dumb business card as the cigar lobbyist. I've developed a cigar called El Politico, which will be a cigar that I will be giving out to friends in the industry as my business card. So I definitely have one for you, Reinhard, and thank you for all that you do and all the work that you do with Light 'em Up, Cigar Journal, and many of your other talents that you provide to this great industry.
Many, many thanks. Before we wrap things up, first of all, I would love to let everybody know that next week we have a very exciting guest as well, and another advocate of the cigar industry and cigar history. Mr. Drew Newman will be joining us live from the Galera floor of the Newman Cigar Factory. So that's going to be an exciting one, and we're really looking forward to that. As always, for those of you who haven't signed up, you can find all information about Light 'em Up World, the lounge, and everything that's going on, as well as our upcoming application on lightemupworld.com. And I have one final question for you, Mr. Habursky, but let's bring in Brian first. Brian, you're still busy playing chess, I believe, multitasking.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm playing multiple games while I watch. Also, I hope this wasn't covered. I was about 20 minutes late, so hopefully my question is relevant. But this has been super fascinating. I'm curious a little bit about science in terms of professionals out there that have done, I don't know, maybe there's some longitudinal studies or something, I imagine, where if you could make the argument and bring the evidence to the table of the difference between cigarettes and cigars. I don't know. I'm thinking of like an as if or something. We obviously there's a lot of science deniers in the States, so there's that element. But like if we were talking about guns earlier, if cigarettes are guns, we know they're very dangerous. Scientifically, cigars are like BB guns. It's a different category altogether, and here's the science to prove it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, there's and we're actually submitting this to the National Academies of Sciences. CRA and PCA are submitting a joint comment. The PATH study, which was commissioned by the National Institute of Health and the Food and Drug Administration, that's the longitudinal study where most of our research comes from. You can find on cigaraction.org, we have a policy resource section, and you can see one-pagers of all of the health and medical information that we address on there. So those are some key talking points that we've inserted. The New England Journal of Medicine also has some information that helps support our propositions and our conclusions that we assert from that standpoint. So, this new study by NAS will hopefully validate and further memorialize those scientific observations and assertions that we've been purporting to elected officials for many years.
Cool. Thanks. Cheers.
And another comment or question from Dejan.
Okay, I have just a short question, a little bit on a different topic. Did you, at your work at PCA, ever encountered the issue of counterfeit cigars?
Yeah, so there was a task force that looked at counterfeiting and the illicit trade of tobacco. There was several members of Congress have been interested in that. There was a bill that was introduced 2 years ago that involved that very topic, and PCA supported that legislation that would, basically curb and kind of fight the issue of counterfeit products and also the illicit trade of tobacco. So that's something I think that, given the discussions with the FDA and the Center for Tobacco Products about their proposed policies on different bans on menthol, bans on flavored cigars, that the illicit trade of tobacco, there's going to be further conversations about that. because whenever you prohibit or ban, or let's say even propose a ban, even if it doesn't go through, there are conversations and parallel conversations about counterfeit products and the illicit trade of tobacco. So I would expect that legislation to come back around this Congress again, and more discussions to come about that very topic.
Thank you.
Mr. Habursky, one final question, and a topic that was actually brought up during some of our previous Light 'em Up sessions, which I believe to be highly interesting, and probably an argument that we should all be looking into, and that is the consideration of cigars and tobacco culture being a world heritage, and whether or not that could provide us all with a supportive argument for the enjoyment and for premium cigars in general. What's your perspective on that?
I think that there's certainly a case to be made for that. I think, here in the United States, we've looked at historic designations, and, this is a topic I would definitely bring up with your next guest, Drew Newman, because of the historic nature of their factory. There's also farms and operations in Connecticut and Pennsylvania that have been, operating for over 100 years. I think the historic, cultural, and social aspect of cigars is untapped territory, and we'll have to get, creative, because there are historic designations and preservations that we can work with government to get those designations. Again, this is a prime topic. If we were to do a forum in the future, and again, I don't want to get ahead of myself and talk too much about this idea as we're formulating it. I think this would be a perfect discussion from the global perspective on how to strategically, memorialize and solidify the cultural, social, and historic aspects of premium cigars.
Wonderful, and I believe a perfect high to finish today's section. I know we could go on for hours, and I'm very hopeful and actually very much looking forward, because that for sure is going to happen, ideally over a shared cigar, and I'm very much looking forward to many more insightful and enlightening conversations together with you, Mr. Habursky. Again, many thanks for your service. Thanks for everything that you do. And in particular, thanks for taking the time today and being here with us at the Light 'em Up Lounge. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you all.
Good night.